And so, why don't you just start out by giving kind of like a brief overview of what is Nillian, what's the purpose of it, and what's your guys' goal with it?
Sure, happy to do that. Nillian is in many ways the brainchild of Andrew Masanto. I would say he is the co-founder at the forefront of it. And we it's interesting because he initially built Hedera Hashgraph, which was one of the top 30 cryptocurrencies, which was pretty innovative in its own right during the 2017 initial boom for having a an alternative consensus mechanism to Bitcoin and one of the early ones. Um, Successful project, really interesting for what they were doing. But then in 2020, right after the pandemic hit, I was with Andrew and our good friend Alex, who's now the CEO of Nillian, and we started to see that crypto was coming back, and all this infrastructure that had been built over the last few years was starting to really materialize into a real industry. And we started looking around as to, okay, what are the white spaces that are left in infrastructure? I think we've always been really interested in what is the blockchain or Web3 infrastructure that really takes or expands things one big leap forward. And what we noticed was a lot of the white space that was there in 2017 just wasn't there anymore. A lot of building had happened. But one little piece, or one big piece that stood out was that you still can't manage or use data fully on in Web3. Part of it is because everything is public, but then also you see these limitations in terms of how fast things can be computed. Blockchains were never really built for computing in that regard. And so that started to become something that was interesting. Now, Andrew had been speaking with our chief scientist, Miguel de Vega, Dr. Miguel, since 2017. And Miguel had been working on privacy preserving technologies, a better flavor of ZKP. But it wasn't something that was super interesting then, nothing that would make a big splash. But as things would have it, right around 2020, 2021, Miguel found a pretty big breakthrough in an advancement of what we call multi-party computation, MPC, in which he found a way to effectively address this white space in a way that had never been done before and couldn't be done before. That was the initial genesis of the idea behind Nillian, which was, wow, if what he's saying is true and his breakthrough is actually real, then we can actually potentially leapfrog Web3 one big step forward. So we met with Miguel in Belgium, with Andrew and Alex and a couple other people, and started running diligence on this interesting piece of technology. And surprisingly, uh, when we got to the end of it, uh, it it worked, and everyone that we brought in to diligence the technology ended up getting so excited that they ended up joining the team. So we have Elizabeth Quaglia. She is a professor at Royal Holloway, at one of the leading cryptography institutions in the world. And she ran an audit, joined the team. Since then, we've had quite a number of other people. We have Andre Lapitz. He is a board member of the MPC Alliance. Initially, started skeptical with the technology and then built an algorithm or built a prototype out of it in Python and got really excited when he realized it worked. He became a co-author of our technical white paper, and he joined the team. And we've seen that happen just throughout the project. And so, it's quite exciting. What Nillian allows you to do is effectively store data across a decentralized network incredibly securely in reaching a standard called information theoretic secure, which effectively means that even if you had unlimited time and unlimited computing power, you wouldn't be able to crack the underlying information. But then more importantly, we're able to then run these very efficient decentralized computations on that data across this decentralized network in a way that you simply just couldn't do before. So in a nutshell, that's what Nillian does. What are the implications? Just to give you a sweeping overview, this allows you to do some fascinating things in Web3. Things like enabling something like Ethereum or other blockchains to actually handle private data. Allows for things like private NFTs, allows for things like uncollateralized lending, allows for a world where you can do things like have these decentralized private enclaves or secure enclaves that don't rely on hardware the way that Intel SGX does. And then even outside of Web3, you have these massive use cases, things like machine learning and AI machine learning, or things like storing healthcare records, but then running studies across those records. I think because of this massive potential impact, we've attracted some pretty stellar people on the founding team. We've got guys like Conrad Whelan, who is the founding engineer of Uber, who's come on board as our CTO. We've got guys like Mark McDermott, who ran crypto Web3 partnerships for Nike until he read our white paper and jumped on board. And you've got guys like Slava Rubin, who is the founder of Indiegogo, running ecosystem. So it's we've been doing a lot over the last year, but that's kind of like the high level overview of what Nillian is and how it came about. And happy to take any kind of questions from the audience. This is an AMA, so feel free to start throwing things at us.
Yeah, Matt, do you want to grab a couple questions from that segment and see and start asking those? I had one myself, which was just when you talked about multi-party computation. What is that? What is MPC?
Sure. So that's been around for a long time. Been around for decades, actually. And the premise behind MPC, a great way to describe this, a lot of people are you familiar with Fireblocks by chance?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Fireblocks is one of the big institutional custody solutions across Web3. Pretty much every big crypto fund effectively uses Fireblocks. And they're built on a technology called MPC, multi-party computation, which in theory has been around for a few decades. And secure multi-party computation effectively is using cryptography so that multiple parties can store information in a fragmented way. So say, pieces of a private key, but then are able to then run these collaborative computations, say signing a transaction with that private key in its different pieces. And so it turns out to be a very, very secure way to just store any kind of sensitive data and then to be able to run those kind of computations. The analogy that's been driving MPC for years has been, imagine you have, 10 people and they all are submitting how much money they make every year, their income, but they don't want each other to know how much they each make. So they can submit all of their income with MPC, using MPC, and then collectively use that data to get, the average income, the median income, to find out, who's at the lowest, who's at the highest, et cetera, things like that. Now,
got it. So that's really, really useful for stuff like healthcare data, where you have all these like, HIPAA requirements and different things like that. Especially you were talking about machine learning. That's a big issue when it comes to doing healthcare, is like healthcare and machine learning, which I personally think there's a ton of like data that could be mined there to improve certain aspects when it comes to healthcare. And in essence, something like multi-party computation allows for instances like that to be realized, because the data is never it's able to be read but never able to be traced back to its origin source, or never tied back to its origin.
That's exactly it. But there has been a caveat to MPC, or multi-party computation, which is the problem with MPC. In Promise, it's fantastic, and it's been great in Promise for decades now. The problem is when you have this data dispersed across many different parties, when they run those computations, up until this breakthrough that Miguel came up with, it's very slow because the more parties that you disperse the information across, when they run these computations, they end up needing to send messages to each other in order to be able to run those collaborative computations. And it reaches a point where it's just not commercially usable unless you have a small number of parties or you own all of the different parties in a centralized place. And so that makes it so that it's basically impossible to have a decentralized network using MPC. It's just too slow. And so if we look at, say, Fireblocks, which is, I would say, the biggest example of MPC, Fireblocks is a centralized company. It's not a decentralized network. Typically you're storing, the keys for institutional custody across a small number of parties, all owned by Fireblocks. And what we have here is, Dr. Miguel figured out a way where, since he's able to, during the computation, uh, make it so that the nodes don't have to send messages to each other, which means it's fast, which means for the first time you can actually have a decentralized network that's powered by MPC. And that's the breakthrough here, because then you can actually have this decentralized network that can do things like the machine learning, or store healthcare records, or store Ethereum data, Ethereum metadata, which is that's quite it's quite interesting.
I would caveat here as well that there are other players that are using MPC, kind of legacy MPC, out in this space right now. I think a lot of bridges use, at least the ones that are trying to be decentralized, use MPC. Some part of the stack, the biggest ones, multi-chain slash AnySwap, Synapse. Uh, but it is about the speed and the size of the network. It's also just about being able to do arbitrary computations almost at all, in reasonable timeframes, like on the order of seconds, instead of the order of sometimes days for relatively simple computations. And that's I think the real advancement.
Got it. So the advancement that you guys have is that multi-party computation has been around for a while. It's just you have made a way for this to happen much, much quicker, which that speed allows just an entire new world of use cases when it comes to using multi-party computation. Correct? Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that's correct. And it's interesting because I wouldn't say we're the only ones that have been trying to advance this. It's interesting because if you look at the different waves of Web3 that have happened, and we've been around since the 2016, 2017 days. The waves tend to be driven by these new advancements in technology, basically these new infrastructures of Web3. And so, for instance, if you look at, say, NFTs, right, that led to a wave. If we look at DeFi, DeFi Summer, that led to a wave. And if we look to Ethereum as a blockchain, that led to a wave in 2017. And from what we're seeing, it's interesting because when we started working on this a year ago, there weren't as that many companies focusing on MPC or advancing it. And I would say privacy preserving tech a year ago wasn't that much in the mainstream either. But we're starting to see that those two things are coalescing. There are quite a number of projects working with MPC now. And we even got featured in a Cointelegraph article about a month ago, highlighting just the different players in multi-party computation. And second to that, privacy-preserving technologies and that narrative across Web 2 and Web 3 is also starting to come to the forefront. And so I think what we have here is potentially we have technology that enables new blockchain or Web3 infrastructure that could actually be the crux of the next wave in Web3, the next cycle up, which I think is really exciting. And I think there's a lot of room in this world of this particular wave of things. We just happen to have, first, we were just very early, and two, we happen to have some pretty unique aspects to it too.
I would agree with that 100%. Just like you mentioned, when ETH came out, when smart contracts came out, that opened an entire new world of crypto that like just didn't exist period before. Like use cases people couldn't fathom before. After smart contracts came onto the scene, suddenly there was all these different ideas people could implement because of that piece of technology. And I think the same thing when DeFi came around, it opened a lot of new use cases for crypto that people hadn't previously thought of or maybe been able to do before because of all these decentralized, financial tools. And so when you're looking at something like what you're talking about, yeah, like absolutely. Like when you have the ability to preserve data on chain privately, that's going to open up a ton of new white space, as you mentioned, for other projects to come in and say, hey, like look at all this white space where we can build these products that we couldn't build before because now we have the ability, the ability for privacy. That's incredible and super exciting just for all overall for crypto, just knowing like, or just seeing how the space is advancing forward and seeing how people are building and innovating and solving problems kind of one after another to create a larger picture of crypto as a whole. I did want to make sure we grab some community questions. Matt, I know you've been compiling those. Do you want to ask a couple of those?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do, I'll just say to everyone listening, I like to make sure that I always say this, that anytime we have a project or a company or just some smart minds with cool ideas on the stage, I always want to say that nothing we say as we get excited or talk about is intended to be like investing advice of any kind. We're never telling you where to put your money. Jesse and I love having conversations with people who are building in this space. I love, to me, like the most exciting part of being in Web3 at all is seeing where creative minds are coming up with new ideas that can transform the market, that can transform culture, or could transform like specific industries. All of that is really fun. And so to us, this is like just building and sharpening the tools in our tool belt as we get to talk with people that have really cool ideas and are actually implementing those ideas. So with that said, I'll ask just one of the like more, there's a few really in-depth questions, and then there's a couple that are a little bit more basic on like the foundational help me understand Nillian. And I'll ask a few of those ones first, and then we'll jump into some of the more in-depth questions. The first from Mazzino, he said, will the Nillian network remain fully independent of the blockchain, or are there some dependencies or areas where the two come together, seeing as it's still a Web3 project, and almost all Web3 projects rely on the blockchain in one form or another?
Yeah, so I think... Oh, go ahead, Christian.
Yeah. So I would say, well, we will likely have our own internal like ledger, not to be built on, not for external consumption, because Nillian fundamentally isn't a blockchain, which means that for payments, blockchains are still the best. We're not here to take blockchains' jobs. So for payments of the nodes and staking and that kind of stuff, we are going to use blockchains technology. But we really see ourselves as a meta layer, is what we call it in the white paper, and we're going to connect to a lot of different blockchains and use the programmatic capabilities of a lot of these different blockchains, and we think that that's where the real synergies, as the question asker said, come in. So I think it's less to do with thinking about dependencies, because we do plan to kind of have portability and be on all of these chains, but definitely as far as the capabilities that are introduced by working with the chains, we definitely plan to take advantage of that.
Cool. Yeah, easy. Next one from Logus. Logus said, can you explain what biometric digital signature is about, and how important will it be in protecting the identity of users?
Sure. So essentially that's, I think, going towards some of the use cases. So that's not going to be a necessity on the network, is that you need to use biometrics. We just think that biometrics are a really interesting factor in security moving forward. The world is moving away from passwords. The UX of current crypto key solutions is not great, I think. Most people agree.
Yeah.
So we see biometrics as one possible factor that could really make some of these experiences better as they become. I mean, they've become really more and more normalized over the past few years because of smartphones. Face ID, Touch ID, all this stuff. And so, with Nillian's tech, and in a way that MPC can't really do, or can't do, it'd be way too slow. We can do in that particleized form, in that private form, matching of those feature vectors. If you do a face scan biometric or your iris or whatever you want, and do the algorithm on the back end to match those, which would allow people to use those for authentication. But then also, we have an FE, a founding entrepreneur, who's really interested in building a product that actually uses that biometric signature to be able to kind of sign documents digitally and try to eat into the market share of something like a DocuSign, for example, which most of the time basically just uses your email. Like, do you have access to this email? Yeah, that's totally a legally binding document, So
Yep.
we think that as a primitive, biometric does have a lot of potential.
Cool. You just mentioned FEs. I don't know, unless I missed it while I was sorting through questions, I don't think we've touched on like what Nillian is doing with founding entrepreneurs. Do you want to touch on that for a second?
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. One of the big lessons from when Hedera was built was that I think in 2017 and 2018 you could get away with innovative technology, and that was enough to propel you into a top 30 cryptocurrency, which is what Hedera is now. What started to happen, which is great, this is just a maturing of, I would say, any industry, is in 2021, 2022, it's not enough just to have great technology. You actually have to have ecosystem. And the example I like to point to, which is Luna, Ponzi and everything aside, one thing they did that was fantastic was when they built Luna, they built about 10 to 20 use cases alongside Luna, from Anchor to Mirror to Chai. And that showcased the ability for what the tech could do. And it built an ecosystem. That's nothing new, right? If you look at the iPhone in 2007, they released the iPhone, but then they also released, the calculator app and the texting app and the camera app to show you what this new platform, in that sense, a smartphone could do. And so we've been thinking about that from day one, and we've actually taken it one step further, which is, beyond just having an ecosystem, what about having a product-focused approach, which is basically what's built, the Googles and Facebooks and Ubers of the world. And so since day one, in addition to having the tech and diligencing it and building it out and all of that, we also started orchestrating a founding entrepreneurs program, but then also orchestrated the compensation for the founding team based so that they were equally compensated to building not just the infrastructure, but also the initial applications. And so what you end up with is we have this founding entrepreneurs program, which we call the FE program. We are, for the last year, have been actively seeking out entrepreneurs that have had either previous exits or are seasoned, that want to build on Nillian, have something interesting that they want to build on Nillian. And we have just been bringing them into the fold so that they are working and building these things alongside the infrastructure, keeping in mind that product focus approach. I believe it's this product focus approach that was able to bring on guys like Conrad, from Uber and Slava, from Indiegogo and Mark from Nike, because they recognize that if this is the sign of a maturing industry, and a maturing set of new projects that are looking for actual real user bases, solving real problems, in addition to innovating great Web3 technology. And so to kind of show for it, we have 7 founding entrepreneurs. Most of them have had previous exits before. One guy sold his company to Palantir in a previous life. One guy sold a company to another big organization. And then we also have this ecosystem of founding entrepreneurs. I think we have about 50 founding entrepreneur interests and applications. In terms of the actual use case and product side, we've signed 30 LOIs, letters of intent, from a number of Web2 and Web3 companies, from decentralized exchanges to gaming companies to NFT companies to healthcare companies. We're approaching this from a real builder's standpoint, taking a lot of those fundamentals from big tech, but then also holding on to the ethos of Web3, which is the decentralized nature and all of those things.
So I had a question. Technically, this would be quantum proof, right?
Yeah, that's really interesting. That was the first thing, it's not the selling point of the technology, but it is definitely it did pique our interest initially. So when you store information across these multiple parties, or in this case, Nillian, across multiple nodes, and you break information up in that way using cryptography, you achieve a standard called Information Theoretic Secure, or ITS. It's not something that we created. It's a standard that's been around in cryptography for over a decade, decades actually. And it basically means that you achieve a standard where there's not enough information being shared amongst the parties where even if you had unlimited time and unlimited computing power, you still wouldn't be able to crack the underlying information. And that's something that Nillian achieves when it stores the data and uses the data that it stores across its network, which is great because it means that it is quantum proof as well.
So that's really compelling to me, just considering, I mean, I know everyone kind of pushes it out to the future, but not just with crypto, but all cryptography when it comes to banks, like everything. As soon as quantum computing does take off, or it does hit the point where it's able to break those encryptions, essentially there has to be a solution for everyone to transition over to. Would you see Nillian as possibly becoming that solution of, like, almost in a sense, like when the government's looking like where are they going to store their information, when banks, or like traditional banks, are looking, how are they going to store their information where it's secure in a quantum computing world? Would Nillian possibly solve that problem?
Nillian as a technology definitely could solve that problem. It's interesting because if we look at Andrew Masanto, I would say his gift is being able to find these interesting technologies and then to commercialize them. Hedera, the technology behind Hedera was never meant to run a ledger. It was meant for faster transactions for MasterCard and Visa. Similarly, for Nillian, the technology that Miguel created was never meant for Web3. He is a brilliant cryptographer, but he wasn't a quote unquote Web3 guy. Rather, the technology was built for a B2B purpose, specifically for banks, so that banks could share sensitive data with other banks without violating any of the regulations or laws, while still being able to collaborate together. When we looked at the tech, we were like, wait, if you take that same technology and bring it onto Web3, you can do a ton of things. And so, the roots of it do go to what you just mentioned, which were, yes, in a government or bank or kind of setting, the technology is robust enough where this could be a contender if quantum computing comes and suddenly, the technologies that have been storing this sensitive data for the last few decades are no longer suitable. Information theoretic security will definitely become a much more important thing, and technologies like Nillian would definitely be at the forefront of that.
Well, and I think it's not even if quantum computing comes. I think it's more a matter of when. And I don't even think it's with something like Nillian, if it served that purpose, it has to even wait until that, that threshold's crossed. I think a lot of people, will be forward looking and say, hey, like, we know this is coming. We know we need to protect this data. And it's just interesting because something like Nillian then opens up blockchain, crypto, and Web3 to revenue sources outside of Web3, which you're talking about the industry maturing. And really, for the industry to mature, it has to have solid use cases outside of just like crypto, right? Like outside of just, hey, everyone's trying to buy a token to sell it to somebody else at a higher value. Real world use case wise, like this could be a gold mine in the sense that like you could onboard banks and corporate customers like Amazon and all their sensitive data, and just forward looking companies that are saying, hey, like, we want to protect our data. We know quantum computing is coming. What if so and so country invents it, keeps it in the dark, and then just starts hitting these companies and accessing this data without them even recognizing that. And so I think there could be a lot of huge use cases for something like Nillian, just even outside of Web3.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I fully agree with you, and I think honestly, I mean, you mentioned storage. I think storage definitely is one place, but that's I think that's small fry compared to the ability to use the stored and kind of secured private data without having to reconstruct it. That's really what whether it's Nillian or any of the other decentralized private computation technologies that are advancing pretty quickly now. That's the real power, is being able to use this stuff before that was insecure when you would ever actually use it. Like you can even if you have there exists quantum proof encryption, but at the end of the day, if you want to use that data, you got to take it and then decrypt it, and then suddenly it's sitting there plain for anyone to steal, right? In transit, and being able to actually use the data that is particleized, as we call it, that's in that highly secure form, is potentially really transformative for Web 2 as well, as you've mentioned.
Yeah, like emails for one. Like if you're looking at Amazon on the back end of their company servers, they're sending emails to each other, and they're not. It's not like every email is going to get downloaded and then encrypted, and then they have to unencrypt it every time they need to read an email. And so, for any sort of active information or moving information, that's what you're saying, that something like Nillian is useful because it allows that information to be still used without having to go into this like kind of cold storage mode.
Yeah, that's the holy grail, and we're seeing different technologies gunning for that. Fully homomorphic encryption has been trying to achieve that for quite a while, but has run into a number of problems. But 100% agree. As we kind of move forward into the next handful of years, and definitely the next decade, this is going to be a pretty important thing, both in Web 2 and in Web 3. Which I think is why so many of us are really excited by this and by Nillian.
Wow. Okay. Well, Matt, do you want to grab some more of those questions and fire those off?
Yes, I would love to. I'm loving this conversation, though. I mean, to me, this is what AMAs are all about: is finding people who are bringing legitimate innovation to the industry. And yeah, I mean, what you guys are doing has the capacity to, in a great way, really shake things up.
Yeah, I think that's why we've always been drawn to these infrastructure projects and infrastructure plays, because when you do have one, you do find one, it's such a big thing, such a big game, and like I said, they're harder to find now. But when we found Nillian, we're like, oh, this is the one. We were incubating about 4 or 5 other projects that weren't infrastructure. And once we found Nillian and we realized that the tech was legit, we dropped all the other ones and poured everything into this one. So likewise, really share the excitement with you on kind of these potentially huge projects.
Yep, absolutely. I love that, man. Cool. Next question from Squiggy. Squiggy said, is there any fear of government backlash and regulations with Nillian's technology when it comes to unbreakable cryptography? When I see things like the imprisonment of the Tornado Cash developer and other things associated in that situation, I know that governments don't always like it when a backdoor doesn't exist. How will Nillian approach that?
Yeah, so I would say Nillian is technology. The difference with Tornado Cash was Tornado Cash had a very, very distinct purpose. It was almost an application. And it was very clear on the tin, right? Use this thing to hide money. And it had an ethos behind it. Whereas when I think when you look at something like Nillian, it's closer to something like fully homomorphic encryption or encryption, period. And in that case, when it's just technology, I would say when you step back and look at the technology of Nillian, it's very clear that, oh, this is just good for the world. Right? It's good for governments could use it, banks could use it, people could use it, tech companies could use it. And then, within there, you always have this small population of a percentage of people that could use it nefariously. But I think as we've seen technology play out, over the years, If you enable great technology, you then get great builders that build great positive things for the world with it. And you get a few ones that build, bad things, and yeah, if the government comes in and regulates on the applications that are quote unquote bad or nefarious, then, that's probably a positive thing. But overwhelmingly, I would say, let's say you build Nillian and ends up being the backbone infrastructure for the way that banks coordinate with other banks, or the way that you store healthcare data, for the state of California while running studies across that data. That those are generally positive things, and governments, I would say, look favorably on those things, and people look favorably on those things.
Would you know, I would say I'm a little bit more bearish than that. I mean, I think the government did try to make encryption illegal, but in general, I agree with the concept. Nillian's the platform. Nillian's the technology, and at the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to products that get built on Nillian to decide how they are going to want to handle some pretty difficult questions around data. But Nillian is neutral about the technology will make sure that nobody who doesn't have authorization to download or see the particles sees them. But at the end of the day, who has that authority is up to the dealer node. It's up to the user and the product.
Sweet. Yeah, awesome. Just a comment here from Proda before the next question. He said, we have built a blockchain-based supply chain tracking method, which basically sends a coin per kilogram sold of our product and are tracking where the coin goes. So our primary customer is the first receiver. They're all hesitant to accept tokens since they're not trusting of the blockchain system. Solutions like the one Nillian is providing would not only bring better encryption, but also it would bring trust to customers like ours if we're able to utilize technology. The project should bring visibility for the end consumer so everyone can track where their products are coming from. So, I mean, already people are seeing, just listening to you guys for a couple minutes and saying, hey, I see where I could get involved and where what you guys are building could actually make our life easier.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things about this technology compared to some other Web3 work that I've done is that I think a lot of people do find, even people who aren't really crypto native, when you kind of spell it out in higher level terms, do find use cases that kind of light them up a little bit immediately. I think a lot of people tend towards healthcare records and the machine learning stuff in Web 2. And they're just like thinking about the concepts of privacy and unlocking those data silos and being able to use hidden data in this way. It's very tangible.
Beautiful. Next question from Jesse VVV. He said he's a researcher at VVV. My first question would be, what, in your opinion, is the most attractive use case for, one, normal users, and then two, enterprises? Also, for which use case do you see the most significant influx of new users, enterprises in the long run? And what is the plan for attracting the right builders, building applications on top of Nillian? And how crucial are, so we can break down each part, this is a long question, but how crucial are those right builders' contributions to the success of Nillian?
Great. It's interesting because, I don't want to take the side of any one use case, because we saw how Ethereum played out. If you were sitting in 2016 and you were thinking, what's the ultimate use case, or one of the big use cases of this new interesting blockchain with a smart contract, I don't think anyone would have guessed, a tire-kicking ape, right? Would be one of the big things. So I don't want to take a side of any particular use case, but what I will say is, this enables quite a number of interesting use cases that we're all quite excited. I think it's the idea of having an uncollateralized loan on Web3 is super exciting. I think the idea of having a decentralized, trusted execution environment that doesn't rely on an Intel chip or hardware is also really exciting. I think enabling Ethereum to handle private metadata or private data, without needing people to migrate to something like a Monero or a Zcash, which they have proven not to want to do, is also really exciting. I think private NFTs are exciting. The ability to take out a loan on Aave without people seeing what exactly you did, I think is also quite interesting. And that's just, my personal flavor of the things that feel really compelling to me. We have a document of about 100 different use cases that can be enabled through Nillian. And, I do, I am hopeful that there is a, board ape of Nillian, a couple years out where we haven't even considered that, and some great developer has a great idea and something catches on and turns out to be really transformative for Web3 and for the world. In terms of the developers and the ecosystem, that goes back to the day one thing for us, which was the understanding of needing to have great products and a great ecosystem. I think our founding entrepreneur program is really compelling for early stage developers because now developers have an ability to actually work with the infrastructure team to kind of shape this additional network in a way that suits the use cases that they want. And on top of that, we have put just as much effort and energy into building out the ecosystem and developer side and relations as much as we have into the technology, which is saying a lot. And so I think as that continues to mature, we've got really great guys like Mark, who ran partnerships at Nike, and Slava, who ran Indiegogo, who just know how to work with compelling entrepreneurs and developers as part of that. And so we're pretty hopeful in terms of making this a good home for people that want to build on top of Nillian, or for projects or companies that just want to use part of Nillian's technology to enhance what they're already doing.
Awesome. Yeah, really solid. Next question from Kako Faria. He said, will Nillian be a DAO in the future? And if so, how would that be applied?
I will hand this to our DAO master, Tristan.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's also a really hard question. The answer is yes. Nillian will definitely have a DAO. The question is, the part of it that's hard is, how does that DAO structure work? Knowing what we know about what DAOs look like today, and this network being, highly secure, critical infrastructure. I mean, when you're dealing with privacy, one thing that is, important to note as a difference between something like Nillian, a network like Nillian, and a traditional blockchain is, if, for example, the worst happened on a traditional blockchain and somebody did manage to double spend because they had, or create an invalid state in some way, there could always be a fork, right? And maybe there's some, because of bridges and other stuff, some lossy behavior, but that would kind of fall through the cracks. But everyone could just decide, hey, actually, we're going to go backwards, and we're going to use a different point in time, and the value is generally kept. I mean, this is sort of kind of what happened with the DAO way back when. With secrets, which is what Nillian deals in with private data, you can't undo a secret. Once a secret is revealed to the world, there's no going back in time and re-hiding it from everyone and Men in Black erasing everyone's memories. So the security of the network definitely is maybe even more mission critical than usual. And what that means for the DAO is that it's going to be a progressive decentralization process where we really need to make sure we're decentralizing in a way where the DAO can kind of, we're stepping gingerly and then, putting more and more weight on our foot to make sure that the DAO is being able to execute on what it needs to do. But the goal is eventually to have, all critical pieces of the network infrastructure be managed by the DAO, so that this is really kind of in the place of a privacy and security public good in Web3, and unassailable.
Yeah, I think that's epic. I think DAO's got a little bit of maybe unnecessary flack just because one cool idea gets associated with one bad project and everyone pushes back. But the use case for a DAO, right? Essentially a community run ecosystem fits with what you guys are doing. So I think once it's completely figured out how that's all integrated, it'll be awesome.
Oh yeah.
Next question. Oh no, go for it. So go for it.
I was just gonna say we're keeping our eye out, and we read every DAO constitution, and we keep our eye out and see how all of the different voting mechanisms and all these things work, and we plan to integrate that stuff.
And I think that's the right move. the hard part is a lot of times the first mover is not the one that we all remember or even remember positively because they came up with a cool concept, they put it into motion, but it wasn't tested. And so we see that a bunch with like the first person to utilize a technology, or the first person to utilize an idea. And so to come in later and say, okay, well, we've seen what works with DAOs and we've seen what doesn't. We've been watching from afar, and now we're going to implement the correct things in order to build like a solid combination of the positives. Yeah, you guys win. Next question from Tinker. He said, will Nillian's technology only be used on the ETH chain, or can it be used across the blockchain space as a whole?
It'll be on every chain, and that's saying a lot. It'll be on many chains. It'll be on the multi-chain. I mean, we plan to be a meta layer, right? And we will be kind of doing interoperability, but not necessarily in the same way I think that a lot of people talk about interoperability these days. Usually that means something similar to cross-chain messaging. So the layer zeros, the Chainlink CCIPs, XLR, all of these projects that are doing kind of chain-to-chain messaging, and even some amount of like shared security, like the Cosmos ecosystem. We're really think of ourselves more of interoperability from a like compositional lens, from a orchestrational lens, maybe, where you're conducting all these different chains. You can read and write to all of these different chains and do logic on that. So it's not about sending messages from one to the other, but rather like looking at the state of, the multi-chain and making decisions based on that. And that logic can be private, which is pretty interesting.
Perfect. Next question from Banana. Banana said, I have a question for Nillian. Does your team see any other current projects as direct competition to your technology or what you guys are building?
Yeah, I think you're seeing a wave of MPC-based technologies that are showing up, and I think that's a good thing, And I think the space is wide enough where there might be some overlap. We talked about Fireblocks earlier; they use MPC, and there potentially is some overlap. If we want to be part of, a potential use case for Nillian could be the Fireblocks for everyone. A great place to store your private key. That does overlap a little bit with Fireblocks, which does institutional custody. But we have yet to see a company that is a direct 100% overlap onto Nillian. I think Nillian can do some pretty unique things. So, yes, I would say there's some quote unquote competitors, but in many ways they feel like more collaborators and kind of people alongside us in this new wave of infrastructure and technology.
Yeah,
So
I agree 100%. I would say for me, I would go broader when we're talking about competitors. I would say, there's decentralized private computation. There's we consider ourselves an evolution, ahead of MPC, but there's also hardware-based solutions, so trusted execution environments, Intel SGX style things. And then there's fully homomorphic encryption, which has maybe been lagging behind a bit in production usability of the math. And then there's ZK, which, ZK is so hot right now. And, all four of those, I think, have an amount of overlap in what they're trying to do as far as privacy preserving stuff. But we think Nillian occupies a really interesting and kind of favorable space of what it can do comparatively. But for sure, there's definitely, you can do some of the same stuff as ZK as you can with Nillian, and it's going to be a matter of products getting out there. But in general, I think we see the whole space moving forward. We see so much room here, because this is all relatively new, and look how much room the programmatic smart contract based ecosystems have created. Even if you take Ethereum completely out of the equation, that's still so much value that's been created, and so many people that are building on different ecosystems across the multi-chain.
Excellent. Fantastic. Next question from James. James said, every project in the entire Web3 space is at risk of getting compromised, but with Nillian, there would essentially be a double reward for bad actors because they could get the financial reward and then sensitive information. Is Nillian prepared for that? And how are you guys going to be dealing with anyone that would try to essentially be a bad actor and take advantage of what you've built?
So, I mean, I think the real question here is how the incentive alignment works for safety, the safety of the network, and the way that the security assumptions that are made are about trust mitigation. I mean, you say trustlessness in this
Yep.
ecosystem, but trustlessness doesn't generally actually exist. I mean, there's some fringe cases, but trust mitigation, by taking that trust and spreading it out over enough parties with enough at stake that it becomes infeasible for that. So when you're saying that the financial reward and the extremely sensitive information are the kind of output of taking it over, I actually think that the financial there isn't really financial reward, or there maybe is if there are keys on the network, but it's really hard for them to know what the financial reward of taking over the network would be, and they just couldn't. The way that the token alignment works out for our token economy, it's such that people who are like nodes in the network would kind of need to collude in mass amounts. So in order to get the amount of nodes that you would need to ever unmask any amount of information in the network would require going over the amount of stake of all of those nodes collectively. And that's, on the one hand, a huge financial burden, especially as the network grows over time, but also, reputationally, the nodes that we foresee, being interested in coming onto the networks that will kind of get onboarded over time on our path to permissionless, will also have huge reputational risk, and I just don't. The security considerations are far too high.
Sweet. Yeah. Easy breakdown. Next from Zillare, will you become one of the best projects crypto has ever seen? I'll answer for you. Yes. Cool to see the support in the chat. Next question from Arun. He said, not asking for any kind of specific numbers or things like that, but what are the funding needs of Nillian at the stage that you guys are on, and how do you plan to manage those over time? Just in general, the plan to sustain the business until revenue is large, when you guys are still in more of a startup phase.
Yeah, this one was really interesting. It's unusual for a project to have existed for over a year now, and to not have raised any funds. And the reason for that is, the entire founding team are, it's a really strong founding team. Pretty much everyone has had exits before, and so we've just been bootstrapping this thing. And realistically, if we wanted to, could bootstrap it for years, like many, many years. And on top of that, I would say that, we have 40 people on the team, but the burn rate is incredibly low because I would say at least half of the project and the core founding team are just working for tokens. They believe in the vision, they believe in the project, and they're not demanding any fiat or cash or anything. That being said, we were at a point this summer where we realized it's time to bring on strong strategic investors that can really make a difference in terms of project growth and awareness, or deeper levels of cryptography or things like that. And so we are just wrapping up our rounds of fundraising, and based on raising about, I think, like 18 to $20 million, and rounds were, I think the main seed round, we never even opened it. There were all this interest that was building, and before we even opened it, it ended up oversubscribing in a matter of, I think, like 72 hours, which was flattering. But that gives us runway for at least 2.5 years just off what we raised. So we don't really see thankfully, I don't really see funding being an issue as to one of the obstacles for Nillian.
Sweet. Yeah, I didn't think so either. Jesse just unmuted. You have a question, Jesse?
Oh no, you can keep going.
I was going to say, I was interested in asking that question just because, I mean, essentially, we've been talking with some of your team behind the scenes for a couple months. And like you said, you almost never see it that someone is building a project and isn't hungry for fundraising just to be able to survive. And not only have you guys been not seeking it out from every single investor group everywhere, it just hasn't even been a focus. Like, you guys are good. You've been focused on building the company at Nillian. You've been focused on building the technology. You've been focused on essentially laying the foundation because you have a solid, diverse team coming from a bunch of different backgrounds in the space that, how do I say this? So many times it feels like I talk to hundreds of projects behind the scenes that have a pretty good idea, but honestly, like, the quality of their success is so dependent on how much money they can raise because they haven't really done anything before and they have nothing to bring to the table except for the ideas. And so it's really refreshing as someone who talks to projects all the time to speak with someone who, like, you guys have, one, the track record, but two, kind of like you said, your own bootstrapped fundraising coming from things you guys have all done as a team or individually, that you haven't been bound to, like, okay, let's raise money in order to just exist. You've been able to build without that being the primary focus. And I think that's, at the very least, really interesting in the DeFi space.
Yeah, a lot of credit to Andrew Masanto on that one. He really assembled this superstar team, and it's not lost on us. And a lot of times we just look around the room and we're like, I just can't believe that there's this, like, coming together of these people. And you see it in the ideas, and the speed of execution. Conrad is building this thing at such a fast rate. And you see just the innovative ideas from the tech team or even on the community side. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's very clear that these are some serious players that have done something like this before at this level of scale in other entities, and they're all bringing that into Nillian, which is great, really, really cool.
Yep, fantastic. Well, why don't we ask just maybe let's ask one more question from the audience, and then we'll see if Jesse has any other closing stuff. I know I have one or two thoughts, so won't keep you guys here too long. So next question from, well, I said Jesse, but this question is coming from a Jesse in the audience. As Nillian not only aims to solve significant issues in Web3, but also Web2, will there be different marketing strategies for each world, so to speak, or are they similar in terms of customer acquisition?
No, I think they're all very different. A lot of this will come down to the entrepreneurs building out the different use cases. And I would say on the Nillian tech side, it's just building the awareness, but then also the integrations with just these different audiences. Traditionally, Web2 companies tech companies look for different things than Web3. On the Web3 side, up until I would say more recently, a lot of it's been about what's the story, and what's the community like, and what's the grassroots, which I think is fantastic. And then on Web2, it tends to be more about what's the product, and how you get users, and how you're going to generate revenue. I honestly think all projects in Web3 are ultimately heading for a Web2, Web3 hybrid, in the sense that eventually Web3 is going to need to be able to address things like product and revenue and things like that. And so, our job at Nillian is to be able to speak to all these different fronts. And as we expand and as we go into new markets, to be able to be compelling to whatever market we're going into, and hopefully some cross-pollination too. I would love to see more of these grassroots, community-driven movements in traditional Web2 companies. I think they could benefit a lot from that, rather than more of the dictatorships that we tend to see in big tech.
Yeah,
And
I totally agree. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that, yeah, I think it's not just customer acquisition from a marketing perspective, but having both Web2 and Web3 in mind is also kind of something that informs the way that we build and design decisions and stuff like that. I mean, I know when I'm designing the token economy or the kind of infrastructure for payment and stuff like that, we always have to be thinking about users who or companies or whoever who may not be crypto native, because that will likely be also part of the user base for Nillian. And then our CTO, Conrad Whelan, who's the founding engineer of Uber, he's amazing, but he has a very Web2 product focus, which I think is really good for a Web3 company. But it means that he's trying to get us into a place where, I mean, we're building the network now, but we're going to get into a place where we're building prototype products every quarter and stuff like that, so that we can really get customers from across the space just by building MVPs that are interesting to them. And I think that having that straddle is going to, and it already has and will continue to inform a lot of Nillian.
Yeah, I love that, man. I've been watching Nillian with a close eye for a couple months now, and I've talked with a couple of people on your team, and so it has been a serious pleasure to just sit down and chat with you guys, almost in like a preliminary AMA, just hearing about what you've been building behind the scenes. I'm all about getting an early look at people that are just honestly doing really cool stuff that has the capacity to be huge. So it's been a blast. For anyone that is listening and you've caught their ear or caught their eye and they want to follow along with what Nillian is building, where would be the best place for them to follow your community and your company and everything you guys are doing right now?
Yeah, I would definitely join our Discord. We are putting a lot of effort into that, especially coming in the next few months. And so that's where I would say the community is always going to find out first about everything from token launch to products to tech updates. It'll always come there first.
Perfect. And for anyone listening, that Discord is pinged AMA Deets. I know it's in there somewhere. One of our awesome Shields posted that earlier this morning. So you can find, yep, I see it. Boom. Discord under official links in the AMA Deets channel. That's directly under the question channel. If you've asked any questions today, you can find their Discord, follow along there. Guys, it has been, I think what you guys are doing is genuinely really, really awesome. And so to be able to have an early stage conversation with you, I don't think it'll be our last conversation. And I'm excited to keep watching Nillian build.
Yeah, this was great. Really enjoyed this. So let's stay in touch, and happy to hop on in the future.
Do you have anything else you want to say, Jesse?
Thank you so much for having us.
No,
Jesse's
yeah,
unmuted.
this has been amazing. Yeah, no, thank you guys. This was amazing. This is great to listen, and we're excited to see you guys build and launch and release and hit the market, and just really excited to see what kind of use cases people are able to come up with using what you guys have built, and just the way it improves crypto as a whole and pushes the industry forward. This has been great. For everyone, just as they mentioned, go check out their Discord. Matt, can you throw a link to it in the chat or the general?
Yep.
Okay,
in
so we'll have a link in
AMA Deets. Links right there. Or boom, Craig Robinson in the chat just dropped their they have a Nillian link right there. So that's easy. Just discord.gg/Nillian. And yeah, this has been great. I think Jesse and I talk all the time about our goal at Obsidian is just to raise the standard in DeFi and to increase the quality of the space in general. And so connecting with anyone who is doing that, but especially on a large scale, is a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate being on.